So then we are back with the more understandings from the Renewed Covenant from the Aramaic English translation of the Word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of Israel, from the prophets of old, from the prophets of Yahweh. These are during the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find the Mashiyach then preparing his people for the tabernacling amongst the people. So then the Mashiyach came and he completed the spring feast. As nicely know, most people can relate with it. It must be taught more often, because we are living during the times of the shadow prophetic events spoke of then by the Shaul the Shaliach. Shaul the Shaliach then did explain what it meant, not the substance of the feasts themselves, but what they signify in terms of then the time of the earth and prophetic events at the same time. So at this very moment we are awaiting for the autumn feast, not very far away from our time. We have at least yet a time where then the cities are returning and there is going to be granted a time of harmony. Though we understand that there is lots of situations going on in the world, where the world then finds itself with earthquakes and pestilences, in rumors of wars and wars, understandable. However, comes a time of harmony, because the holy cities are returning, and then in Yershiyahu, the 61st chapter, he states even the heathen, or then Gentiles, would observe the mighty hand of Yahweh. He was speaking of the holy cities being treated as special places, obviously because Yahweh is living amongst his people. Yeshua, then Yahweh himself said, "Go around the world therefore and make holy tabernacles," because he had taken place of his Father, and then they would be linked in his spirit with each of the Holy of Holies. Thus we understand what's coming in the future when we read Revelation, the 6th chapter. The translator of Revelation did not understand it was the autumn feasts writings and then related with the altars, because then the holy city became holy cities. So then we understand in 08-09 the covenant of death was finished. Then also the Nahashtan's reign of 1,000 years since 1009 then had ended. We then began our time of restoration and reduction. When was the Mashiyach spending time with the Samaritans while completing the spring feast? He was then in 5031. He was placed on a pole a year later. Then he spent time with the Samaritans. He gave them 2 days, 2,000 years of rulership of the earth. These means whatsoever comes as a result of prophecies must fit this 2,000. Because the rulership of the Gentiles in prophetic, they must match at the end. So begin to understand. Those must be in line. You can't move any of those forward or backwards, but they must be in line and then finishing at the proper time. So then he spent time with the Samaritans 5031. 2,000 years later, how many years then? 7031. We already have the situation over the 7,000. So then 7031 is the very maximum. So then we are in 7012. Makes roughly 20 years. This is what is left of the prophecy. Do the calculation. However, make sure you read them from the Aramaic or Hebraic copy, so then you can understand what it means. The time is very short. And we understand from then Yershiyahu 1:8, then the city returning, the first holy city of this time of restoration, found in the land of Cush. Read the Revelation, tabernacling amongst the fierce. Meaning, the people of the land, they work as filters. Filtering system, filtering every action, every aspect in the spirit. So then, whatsoever is done must come from Yahweh or does not survive. It is the indicator of the first city of the many cities. Understand the simultaneous understanding of the same time. You find then Yochanan in the first holy city of his time. Why? Because he was then a Mashiyach. He lived with the Mashiyach. He did understand the Mashiyach. They ate together. They spoke together. They spent time in the Torah. They went to the temple. They read together. He experienced then the Mashiyach himself came and he delegated responsibility to his people. He brought the first anointing for the second tabernacle services. He then gave them the order for them to go around the world and form holy cities. Yochanan was with them. Later came Yershiyahu. He began then the delegation of responsibility. He began then to separate those people that were set apart. They began to be functioned. They were beginning then to be sensing. And they were placed aside. When you read Romans, let every soul be subject to the authorities of the kingdom to come government, then you understand why. So then it was a form of the city being prepared. Later when Yochanan entered the holy city, he had a lot of work to do. He had to take the Torah and the prophets and the writings. He had to take the entire teaching of the Mashiyach, and those were placed on Megillas. It was a huge work, because Yochanan was set then the model city, the first holy city after his ascension. The subsequent cities had to be copied from the time of Yochanan. Thus you understand how important it was for him to be in a city secluded while receiving then the revelation. So he had the entire situation in his hands, and he had to make sure those were in paper, and then he would send out other people, other places, as a set of people forming other holy cities, and from then on and on and on and on. So they learn what to say, they learn how to act, they learn how to teach, they learn how to write. Because each of the groups going out of this first city, they had to have a copy of the entire Megillah, ever since the Torah was then placed on paper or then animal skin, until the revelation, the last portion of it, named the autumn feast. So then they went. So then the people began then to form other holy cities until 1009. Thus his people would be given directives. When you read ruler, does not mean ruler. It means giving directives. Every nation wise of coming to the holy cities and asking, making inquiries of Yahweh, they would have to have their understanding line up with his, and being wise and obeying what he said. He is not ruling or taking over people's liberties. They can do whatever they want. But if they are wise, they do what Yahweh told them to do. Thus, may be signifying rulership, but it's not rulership, it's giving directives. So then, in 1009, you find the holy city then leveled. The city then was finished with. And then the tomb also was destroyed. Thus began the time of deceit. Nahashtan then, the destroyer, was put to prison. That's our first understanding of the pit. Destruction of the holy city and the tomb. Thus the pit. In the spirit, the pit. Try to understand. The pit. Then came the angel, bound Nahashtan, destroyer, and he was in prison. However, his facet of deceiver remained, thus the church. Speaking of the Mashiyach outside of the Holy Tabernacles, nonsense. For 1,000 years the nations were then deceived. And then in 08, 09 ended these 1,000 years, so then we are returned to the truth. That's the time of restoration and the reduction of time from 70-31. Why? Because the Mashiyach, you did understand, then the layer of the fact of the Mashiyach being with Samaritans for 2 days in 50-31. 2,000 years, 70-31. What year we are at? 70-12. The time is very short. time for the returning of the holy cities, while the time is being reduced from the end, and there is in 7031, roughly. It can be a give and take of maybe a year or two, no longer than 2. So then we begin to understand that during this time, even the autumn feast has to fit this time period. Whatsoever the Mashiyach Yahweh said, then 7031 is the very maximum. Even the autumn feast has to fit prior of 7031. So you begin to understand the gravity of the time related with the scripture. So then, the city in the land of Cush is then the first holy city since the time of Yochanan, because it has to be then completed as it was before. So then the other subsequent cities, until it forms the number of cities related then when you read Revelation. What you read is future understandings of it. Future. You read a section of it of the cities of the time, and you read the cities of the future, because we are speaking of the future. The returning of the holy cities, we are then leaving those old traditions behind and starting a new understanding, time of restoration. Restoring of the holy cities as per Yershiyahu, the 61st chapter. Then you find what it means. Those cities are not the vicinity of Jerusalem. Those are not what Yahweh is explaining. Those are the holy cities where the Mashiyach said for them to go around the world and form holy cities. That's the time of restoration. Returning of the holy cities. So then, in the land of Cush, there is the first holy city that's going to be the model of the others of this time. However, the filtering system is the very country itself, the land of the fierce, because whatsoever does not have a link with Yahweh himself does not survive. Thus the filtering system. The whole city is going to be filtered to its maximum until it reaches 100% perfection as it was during the time of Yochanan. Then from then on, other cities are going to simply copy what then Yochanan already had instructed them to do. But then Ruach HaKodesh is going to have a lot of work in this city, because he has to remind the people of this time what they should be doing as examples as what they used to do during the time of Yochanan, so then the other cities subsequently can only do what they were told to do. That's restoration. It's not a new situation, it's simply restoring. But then as you read then in Maccabees, during the time when then the Babylonians invaded the holy city of Jerusalem, and then they were in search of the Holy Ark, and they could not find it. Why? Because the elevator shaft that was in the Holy of Holies was then activated, and then the Ark was out of the temple. They could not find it. It was under then the temple, somewhat in a cave away from the main site. How did they discover this place? Well, in 82, there was an American archaeologist that found the site. And he also found then this section in Maccabees, where then Ruach HaKodesh had to remind even the priest, Yershiyahu, he was reminded on how to use the system, the elevator system, because they did not have the record anymore, because the temple was built roughly 500 years earlier. They did not even know how to activate the elevator shaft. And it was then revealed to Yershiyahu via the Spirit. Read Maccabees. That's why it's so important studying the Apocrypha. There are very important information in the Apocrypha, found mostly in Catholic Bibles. You find the Apocrypha there. But then the situation is you find Ruach HaKodesh reminding the servant Yershiyahu on how to use the system, and then the priests went up and they saved the ark. The same situation is when the land of Cush then receives the site and then the city is built. There's going to be a lot of work where then Ruach HaKodesh is going to re-teach the people as during the time of Yochanan. Obviously, because it's a restoring time. It's not restoring time of, for instance, pleasures of the flesh of what people would think should be what God has for them. No, we are speaking of the living Torah, speaking of the living Torah. Yahweh is speaking of Yahweh. Why? Because the Mashiyach was then Yahweh himself in person as the Son. However, he was speaking of his Father Yahweh. So Yahweh is speaking of Yahweh, and then the tabernacle is included in this understanding of the living Torah. Is that confusing for you? Maybe because you don't understand the Torah. Otherwise you would understand. So then, moving on, from then on, after the teachings of then Ruach HaKodesh, other people are going to be established, and then they won't go out then in sets of people forming other holy cities as during the time of Yochanan. And it's going to be very prosperous. That's why Africa has then huge potential and certainly will be very developed and very organized. You can be sure of it, because the reason why Asian countries are so organized these days, it's because of the work of Shaul the Mashiyach primarily, founding those holy cities. Later, many of the sites where Mashiyach Shaul was found at became holy cities. The true first holy city was during the time of Yochanan, understandable. But then Yochanan, obviously, during the time where he was at, obviously they visited many places in Asia, and those places became holy cities. Thus then, when the cities were destroyed, then 1009, you understand what it means, the time of deceit. And then time of restoration of those holy cities, and then later the rebuilding of the temple and the restoring of the city of Jerusalem. However, have in mind, the courtyard was given to the Gentiles, meaning we understand there is a Palestinian state. So we have to fit the entire situation related with it. But we are speaking of the city in this earth, the Jerusalem city of this age, not the city to come, spoken of by Mashiyach Shaul in the 11th chapter of Hebrews. So you must understand how, in quote, to navigate from layer to layer without having any kind of interference in our understanding. But then if you're not versed in the Torah, the prophets, and the writings, if you think the Torah was abolished, then you'd never understand. And quite honestly, these understandings are for the Africans, because it has to be filtered. In America, unfortunately, they use whatsoever is convenient for them. They read what is convenient. Whatsoever is convenient to them, they read, and if they like, they use it. If not, they throw it away. It's not this way when we are working for the Yahweh. When the Yahweh speaks, then it remains as it is. It must be tested. That's why then Africans, they know how to test it. So then when the first holy city then is closed, then we understand from then on is going to have many other cities. Because it's a time of restoration. What then Yochanan saw? He saw the future. He saw the future. And we understand those are permanent places. And the angels that were granted to each of those cities, they should remain there. But they are not there anymore. But they are returning. Because we find through time of the earth and spirit those 7 cities then sounding of the shofar and the pouring of the cups from those cities. Those cities were in existence during the time of Yochanan, because the Mashiyach wrote to those cities. And then what do you think went on? The vengeance. The vengeance is future. When you read vengeance, you are reading the future. prior of the vengeance starting, or the sounding of the shofars and pouring of the cups, you have then the understanding of the geographical area where vengeance is going to come from. When the vengeance, the actual vengeance is taking place, then you are speaking of the future. Means the cities must return to their active state. Thus you begin to understand what it means, a link in the spirit versus time, or temporal time in the earth. It's already starting making sense, because then in the 6th chapter you understand the altars. There were people slain during the time of Yochanan, because they were linked with each of those Holy of Holies. So as in the future, the linking is non-temporal. The timing in the earth is temporal. That's why people don't understand. When they read a certain area without the Torah, they begin to isolate those times in the earth where they shouldn't have. Because what you read in Revelation is then from the time of the Mashiyach, those places were in existence. However, they were in sin. The Mashiyach gave them a piece of his mind of the situation. In the future, when you read the vengeance coming through those cities, then you understand what he meant. Is much more in the future. However, the geographical area remains, meaning restoring. Time of restoration. It started making sense. Truly it is. Please stay tuned. Much more coming up.